In 1975, NBC premiered a sketch comedy and variety show which they called NBC's Saturday Night. We now know it as SNL or Saturday Night Live. No one escapes its humor. One of the original cast members was a Gilda Radner. If you're old enough, you might remember her character as the newscaster Rosanna. When John Belushi overdosed and died on pills, she stated that she and all the cast thought they were immortal. And when this happened, that they had to change their whole perspective on life and on death. And then she began to feel ill. And she struggled for many months trying to figure out what was wrong, and she was misdiagnosed until finally she was told that she had ovarian cancer. So she wrote a book about her 3-year struggle with cancer that, if you remember, was called It's Always Something. And she finished the book believing she would be fine. She thought she would have the perfect ending. So she wrote this. She wrote, "I wanted a perfect ending. Now I've learned the hard way that some poems don't rhyme and some stories don't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Life is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it without knowing what's going to happen next. It's about delicious ambiguity," she said. Well, the disciples of Jesus also wanted the perfect ending. They believed that Jesus was the one who would take over the Roman Empire, free the world of all persecution and pain. That was not the ending Jesus had in mind. And somehow, Jesus had to let the disciples in on reality, who he really was and what life was really all about. Jesus had to teach them to deal with ambiguity and somehow get them to the point of understanding that life is filled with a tremendous amount of ambiguity, and it can become delicious ambiguity. So he took them up on Mount Tabor, and he opened their eyes and he opened their minds, and he gave them a different way of looking at life and the challenges that life presents to each one of us. He was transfigured, and they were changed. Interestingly enough, one of the other gospel writers talked about the apostles wanting to stay there on the mountain, build 3 tents, not go back into the difficult and ambiguous world. But Jesus just wouldn't allow it. They had to go back into the valley with their new understanding and their new perspective on the ambiguities of life. They had to put into practice in the real world the experience that they had with the Lord. I believe that we can all get stuck in wanting to see the world in a certain way. I believe that we can all get stuck in expecting that the world is going to go the way we want it to go. I believe that we can all get stuck in anger and despair and doubt about life when it doesn't turn out the way we want it to turn out. The apostles expected Jesus to be the Messiah, the secular leader who would change the political landscape. They didn't expect that he would have to suffer and die, and they didn't expect that redemption came through suffering and death. They had to realize the paradox of the cross, how joy and sorrow are both part of the journey of being an apostle or a disciple. Those who might be familiar with Ignatian spirituality recognize the term consolation and desolation, the funerals and the weddings of life, that each has its role in disciplining us for discerning God's presence in our own particular experience. That loss is as important as gain in becoming mature individuals. If we only know how to celebrate, we will never ever be prepared for life's downturns and life's crises. What an important lesson for us to learn in the midst of all that's happening in our world and the crisis of our health system these days, as we experience the epidemic threatening the global community, both physically and economically. Gilda Radner had to see her life through different eyes. She had to change her approach and accept that life was filled with ambiguity and certainly was not going to go the way she had planned that it would go. And so did the disciples. Lent offers you and me the opportunity to take a new look at life and experience for us, each one of us, a change of mind and a change of heart. Lent gives us the opportunity to open ourselves to allowing the Lord to break through our sometimes hardened hearts and give us another way of seeing things, a new perspective. If you watched 60 Minutes a few weeks ago, there was a very interesting piece about the 2020 revival of West Side Story in New York. The original play and movie date back to the late 50s. The Leonard Bernstein music, the Sondheim lyrics have been amazing for 60 years, and 60 years later now, they're taking another look at the story and they're fitting it into contemporary life. The revival is radically different from the original. The original choreography is gone, and the classic set is replaced with a 25 cameras video production that's projected behind the actors on the stage. Sondheim, who wrote the lyrics, said that what keeps the theater alive is reinterpretation. But what remains virtually untouched is the music, which has endured for 60 years. We're all constantly reinterpreting our lives. But what is most important and what is most essential is saved. But there's a new way of looking at it. And that's the same thing with the message of Jesus. What is essential, most important, will always endure. But each one of us has to constantly be reflecting on the essential message of Jesus, struggling to make it come alive again wherever we find ourselves in our lives and in the history, in a world that's filled with ambiguity. So as the apostles needed to go up to the mountain to gain new perspective on life, have their eyes opened and their hearts opened to the meaning of Jesus' message, so do we. The apostles had expectations of life that were not real. And so did Gilda Radner, and so did the entire cast of SNL. Life is filled with happiness and tears, says Sunrise, Sunset, the song. So during this Lenten season, it's an opportunity for each one of us to look at our lives and how we integrate our Christian faith wherever we might find ourselves today, with whatever cross each one of us might be carrying. And we all carry crosses. Because some poems don't rhyme, and some stories don't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. And life really is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it without knowing what's going to happen next. It's about, as Gilda Radner said, delicious ambiguity. But Jesus gives each one of us a framework to find peace in the midst of this delicious ambiguity.